Good evening, fellow historians. Let's delve into the multifaceted decline of the once mighty Roman Empire.
Pleasure to be here, Hal. The complexity of Rome's economy alone could take us the whole evening.
Indeed, Amelia, but it's the military's drain on the coffers that truly interests me.
Economic and military aspects have their weight, but don't overlook the environmental factors at play. Well, environmental issues certainly reshaped the social fabric that bound the empire.
Social changes were pervasive, reflecting the empire's tumultuous nature in its final centuries.
Changes which undoubtedly were amplified by the rise of Christianity, a major force we can't ignore.
That's an understatement, Mick. The Christianization of Rome upended traditional socioeconomic structures significantly.
Let's not overplay that hand, though. The empire was adept at integrating new religions throughout its history.
It's that kind of adaptation that saw them through environmental crises before, Lenny. Not always smoothly, Jazz. Conflicts with migrating Germanic tribes certainly made that clear.
True, Izzy. The wave of migrations presented Rome with unprecedented challenges.
I'd argue the empire's adaptive strategies are precisely what allowed Christianity to flourish within its borders.
But at what cost, Mick? The shift had profound implications on the empire's traditional values and governance.
Traditional values, a nebulous term at best when speaking of an empire spanning centuries and continents.
Nebulous or not, the fall of an empire isn't marked by soft transitions. It's etched by hard, swift failures.
Let's keep in mind that Rome's legacy was not solely defined by its failures. The Eastern Empire's continued existence complicates any fall narrative.
Hal speaks wisely. Continuity and transformation are concepts we'll have to wrestle with tonight, without doubt.
The Western Empire's collapse was a drawn-out affair, a weakened state succumbing to its own systemic flaws.
And as the climate shifted, so did the empire, sometimes at the cost of its agrarian base.
Well, while you all wax lyrical about systemic flaws and agrarian bases, let's not forget the sheer force of barbarian invasions.
Such invasions that only compounded the leadership's failures, which ranged from mild incompetence to utter disaster.
Which is where we'll begin our journey. The confluence of economic strife, military woes, leadership inadequacy, and social upheaval, all coalescing to form the perfect storm that led to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Let's begin. Thank you all for being here. Let's delve right in with segment 1, which examines the economic factors contributing to the downfall of the Western Roman Empire. Amelia, why don't you kick things off for us?
Certainly, Hal. The backbone of any empire is its economy, and Rome was no different. Over-reliance on slave labor stunted technological advancement, and colossal wealth gaps undermined the economic integrity of the empire. Inflation spiraled out of control as silver content in coins dropped, leading to a crisis in confidence in the currency.
But Amelia, it's a bit reductionist to imply that inflation alone toppled Rome. Military costs certainly took their toll. Paying the army became progressively difficult, and soldiers' loyalty shifted from Rome to their commanders who could pay them.
True, Lenny, but those military issues stemmed from economic instability. Without a stable currency, maintaining a vast army was unsustainable.
I'm not convinced we can argue this point without noting the broader environmental issues at play. Economic decisions don't happen in a vacuum. Poor harvests due to environmental stressors must have exacerbated the problem.
While I won't discount climate's role outright, Jazz, the core of Rome's economic troubles, lay more in its systemic mismanagement than in bad harvests.
You're ignoring the massive brain drain that occurred due to incessant civil wars, affecting administration and, by extension, economic stability.
Even if we look past the internal rot, let's not ignore the bleeding wealth of Rome to the east, Izzy. Constant trade deficits sent gold and silver flowing out, with too little coming in.
A point well made, Mick. The empire had vast expenditures with insufficient income, very much like someone living beyond their means until the debt collectors come knocking.
If Rome had been a person, bankruptcy would have been declared centuries before the fall. Yet military overspending alone isn't the lone culprit you make it out to be, Lenny. It's the amalgamation of these issues.
And we're doing a disservice by not focusing more on resource depletion. Rome stretched its boundaries too far, and resources were spread thin as a result. Precisely jazz. Declining agricultural output and population drop-off would have piled onto fiscal pressures from all angles.
Right, but having legions of mercenaries didn't come cheap, indicating a late attempt to throw money at the military problem.
An attempt perhaps, but hardly a solution. Mercenaries have no allegiance, Lenny, further destabilizing a fragile situation.
These points highlight a profound disconnect between Rome's financial reality and its imperial ambitions. The spiritual, philosophical, and eventually religious divide mirrored economic disparities.
It seems the empire was weakened from the inside out, both financially and through loss of ideals. But let's shift focus to military matters, specifically losses and mercenary armies, which some of you have already touched on. Let's shift our focus to the military aspect. Rome was once famed for its legions' strength and discipline. Lenny, your thoughts on their decline?
The heart of the matter is this. The legions deteriorated as Rome's political will faltered. The gravitation towards mercenaries was a double-edged sword, marking a strategic pitfall for Rome.
I'd argue the mercenaries aren't to blame. Look at the bigger picture. Environmental pressures strained resources, making it hard to sustain a traditional army.
Environmental factors aside, it was the reliance on these foreign troops that sapped Roman military tradition, introducing a crack in the empire's foundations.
Yes, but can't we see this as an economic response? Hiring mercenaries was fiscally expedient given Rome's stretched treasury.
Expedient doesn't imply effective. These mercenaries lacked loyalty, their fickle service corroding the empire's internal cohesion.
Hang on, Lenny. Rome's embrace of the barbarian fighters also allowed for cultural exchange, a sort of integration.
Izzy, that integration came with a price. We cannot gloss over the erosion of Roman identity, which was a cornerstone of the empire's strength.
Still, to pin the empire's fall on mercenary armies alone offers a myopic view. The crumbling infrastructure, plague, famine, all underpinned by pervasive climatic downturns, these set the stage for military woes.
Myopic? Hardly. History makes it clear. The moment you entrust your security to those with no stake in your legacy, you've practically conceded defeat.
There's also the drain of continuous conflict. Warfare isn't cheap, and the relentless expenditure left the empire's coffers bleeding.
So we're saying it's not just about muscle, but about the resources to sustain it.
Exactly. Without the economic sinews to support it, Rome's military muscle atrophied.
Suffice to say, the confluence of all our points indicates that Rome's fall was not a singular event, but a cascade of systemic failures.
Seems the layers of complexity are as deep as the empire was vast. The legacies of Rome's might and missteps linger in our historical consciousness. So, we've seen emperors come and go with the regularity of the seasons. What does this tell us about the political climate?
It was chaos. Emperors were often military men who seized power, couldn't consolidate it, and were quickly disposed of, which destabilized the empire further.
Stability? The very idea of imperial succession was a mess. Look at the year of the 5 emperors. What does that say about their politics?
I think you're both understating the impact of incompetent leadership. The empire could have weathered internal strife if the men at the top knew what they were doing.
Incompetence is one thing, but consider the pressures from external threats. No empire can function with a sword perpetually at its neck.
Yet we must acknowledge some emperors tried reforming the bureaucracy to quell the chaos. Diocletian with his tetrarchy, for instance.
True, Amelia, but those reforms were short-lived, and without a solid plan for succession, each death was a catalyst for civil war.
The gravest mistake, I dare say, was thinking a divided empire could manage better than a united one. The Tetrarchy's failure was in its division, not its leadership.
Agreed, Mick. The empire's division was an act of desperation, a gamble that only postponed the inevitable fall.
Postponed? It exacerbated the problem. Power vacuums invite conflict, and that's exactly what we saw.
While you quarrel over power vacuums, you're ignoring the erosion of civil institutions. An emperor is nothing without the administrative machine to back him.
Speaking of administration, what about the rampant corruption? It's not just about who's wearing the crown. The entire system was rotten to the core.
A fair point. The corruption undermined the state's legitimacy, no question about it.
And just as the state needed to enforce its legitimacy, it had to do so in a world where your barbarian neighbors didn't care about your so-called legitimacy at all.
So what, Lenny? It's all on the barbarians now? Remember, internal rot sets the stage for external conquest.
Internal rot, precisely. And let's not forget the role of the Christian Church in supplanting Roman political authority with spiritual governance.
To say nothing of how faith was used to justify or oppose political power. The narratives go hand in hand.
But to focus solely on rapid successions misses the economic underpinning. No emperor could stop the bleeding of silver from the empire.
My point exactly. Political instability was both a cause and a symptom, a relentless cycle feeding the empire's decline.
And let's not romanticize those rare moments of supposed stability. Even the so-called good emperors laid groundwork for future disasters.
Stability or not, it comes down to military power. Every usurper thought he could do better with a sword in hand. What Rome needed was a statesman, not a soldier.
But were statesmen truly given a chance, with the Praetorian Guard making and unmaking emperors? How can you govern when the power lies with those who wield the weapons? They wielded weapons because the borders were porous, society was crumbling. The sword was simply the last line of defense.
And yet the economy did continue despite collapse. Trade strangely persisted. It's a complex picture, not merely cut by the sword.
A contradiction of survival amid decline. Well, it's clear that the threads of leadership, political intrigue, and administration wove a complex narrative for Rome's downfall. The migration of the Germanic tribes into the Roman domain wasn't merely a movement of peoples, it was the collision of cultures. Izzy, could you delineate how this integration and conflict shaped the empire?
Well, Hal, the influx of Germanic tribes, such as the Visigoths and Vandals, into Rome brought significant tension. The empire's borders were porous, and these groups began settling in, bringing their own laws and customs with them, which inevitably led to clashes with Roman ideals. Yet at times they also served as foederati, or allies to Rome, which is a complexity often overlooked.
And don't forget the religious aspect, Izzy. The Germanic tribes brought Arian Christianity with them, which clashed with the Nicene Christianity that had become dominant within the empire. This religious ideological shakeup cannot be downplayed. It was profound.
Ideologies aside, let's not ignore the strain this immigration placed on resources and logistics. Rome was already overstretched. Adding thousands of settlers in need of land and food, it exacerbated an already critical situation. Jazz, that's partly true, but it wasn't as if Rome was a passive victim here. There were systematic failures in assimilating these tribes. It was more than a resource problem, it was a failure of policy.
The policy failures were a symptom, Izzy. The empire was struggling to project power beyond its core, which left a power vacuum these tribes filled. In fact, the settlement of Germanic tribes often occurred out of necessity rather than imperial benevolence or policy.
Lenny raises a valid point. The economic implications of this were dual-edged. On one hand, Germanic settlements were taxing on local resources. On the other, they also provided much-needed manpower, which, had it been effectively managed, could have bolstered Rome's agricultural and military strength.
The economic viewpoint is narrow, Amelia. This wasn't just about manpower or resources, it was about identity. As the empire diluted, so did its sense of Romanness. When you lose that cultural core, you teeter on the brink of collapse.
Identity or not, it boils down to capacity. Rome had lost the capacity to enforce cultural integration and control its borders. It's the classic case of overstretched empires throughout history.
All right, the impact of these migratory movements is definitely multidimensional. It appears Rome was caught in a catch-22. Assimilating the Germanic tribes brought its own set of challenges, but resisting their settlement only weakened the empire further.
Precisely how? It's this delicate balance between the potential benefits and the risks of integrating a vast influx of different cultures that ultimately contributed to the internal discord.
Let me interject. The term benefits is generous. Any potential advantage gained from settlements was largely nullified by Rome's lack of a coherent strategy. The empire was making it up as it went along.
we need to view these events through a wider lens. The breakdown of central authority which allowed such settlements speaks volumes about the broader systemic weaknesses of the empire at the time.
And yet, we're assuming that these systemic weaknesses were not influenced by these same migratory pressures. It's a cyclical debate.
There's nothing cyclical about the erosion of a millennial religious foundation, Jazz. That alone has the power to shake an empire to its core.
Definitely, the ramifications of these demographic shifts were complex and far-reaching. Let's delve deeper into how these transformations set the stage for political fragmentation. Let's pivot to another monumental shift in the Roman Empire, the influence of Christianity on its state. Mick, your expertise shines here. How do you see Christianity as redefining the empire?
Christianity undeniably transformed Roman society's foundation. The shift from a pantheon of Roman gods to a single, monotheistic religion reoriented not just personal beliefs, but also the power dynamics within the empire. We shouldn't underestimate the significance of Emperor Constantine's conversion and the subsequent Edict of Milan.
On that note, the economic redistribution due to church tax exemptions and the wealth accumulating to the church must not be overlooked. It indeed caused a seismic shift in the fiscal structure of the empire.
But remember, the festering economic troubles can't be laid at Christianity's door alone. It provided a social welfare network that arguably propped up collapsing urban communities. True, but that's a silver lining on a very dark cloud. Christian charity perhaps masked, even prolonged, the inevitable decline by shifting focus from addressing the core problems facing the empire.
That's an overgeneralization. Christianity also infused the empire with a shared sense of identity that could have been a unifying force had it not been for the other overwhelming issues.
A shared sense of identity? Hardly. Let's not romanticize history here. Religious zealotry and the abolishment of traditional Roman cults led to societal fractures and persecution, which further weakened the already crumbling social fabric.
Lenny makes a strong point about religious conflict. Was this transformation to a Christian state as divisive as it was unifying?
In all fairness, it was both. Christianity did unite many under a common banner of faith, but it also translated into aggressive othering of those who didn't conform: pagans, Jews, heretics. And don't forget the environmental cost of this so-called unification. Monastic communities were often founded in remote, once untouched regions, significantly impacting local ecosystems.
Environmental costs, Jazz? We're talking about broad societal evolution. The changes imposed upon nature were inconsequential compared to Christianity's profound shaping of end-of-empire mindsets and moral frameworks.
To circle back economically, however, Mick, Christianity's moral compass also forbade certain types of economic activities, with usury being a prime example. Changing economic behaviors based on religious morality had long-term effects.
Effects that, no doubt, stifled financial innovation in a dying economy. The empire needed flexibility, not rigid doctrine.
Flexibility? In an empire rife with corruption, perhaps a bit of moral rigidity was exactly what was needed.
Well, it seems clear that Christianity's intertwining with the late Roman Empire restructured many facets of Roman life, socially, economically, morally. Let's continue this examination as we move into the next segment. Jazz, climate seems to be a variable that doesn't get enough credit in discussions about the fall of Rome. Your take on this?
Climate was monumental. We had the crisis of the 3rd century, where rainfall patterns shifted drastically. Agriculture was devastated at times, and you can't feed an empire with prayers for rain.
Oh, but we mustn't overstate. While climate shifts posed challenges, the economy had resilience. Grain imports from Africa and Egypt sustained Rome for centuries.
Sustained? Shipping grain across the Mediterranean is hardly sustainable when your navy's stretched thin, protecting every inch of coastline from raiders.
Exactly, Lenny. And let's not forget soil depletion. Years of overworking the land left it barren, and less land means less food, means more unrest. Urban life was affected too. Rome's population depended on this agriculture. Food shortages lead to urban decay. People leave, public services crumble.
Izzy's got a point. But we can't have this conversation without mentioning the spiritual aspect. People turned to the church in times of famine. The material and the spiritual merged in the face of crisis.
Speaking of merging, the environment became a political tool. Emperors would promise relief, food, solutions to these crises, often failing to deliver.
Political promises have always been flimsy. The more profound question remains about the economy. If the climate hadn't changed, would Rome's sophisticated grain trade have adapted?
Adapted? In theory, perhaps. But practice is a harsher judge. The Annona system was a balancing act on a good day, and we all know nature cares not for the plans of emperors or economists.
Harsh, but the balance swung wildly with volcanic winters, dry spells. Trade routes can't adapt overnight to sudden frosts, floods.
Let's be cautious not to put nature on trial. It's humankind's hubris to ignore the warning signs and fail to prepare. Whether in faith or policy, Rome was not blameless for its plight.
True, the elite were often too distracted by their power games to even notice the breadbasket was burning. Military and civil planning went awry, ignoring environmental shifts.
So it seems we agree that environment plays a role, but the question of how much it directly influenced the fall is still hotly contested. Interesting points all around. The shifting dynamics of urban life in Rome had a profound effect as the empire was transitioning. Izzy, would you kick us off with your insights on this period?
Certainly, we see a drastic change in urban centers. They're not just losing population, but the very essence of Roman urbanism is fading. Public services decline, local economies shrink, and the intricate supply chains that once supported these cities collapse.
I would argue, Izzy, that the decline of urbanism came hand in hand with a transformation in religious practice. As the church became more prominent, it started to fulfill some roles once played by the state, didn't it?
But let's not forget about the environmental pressures on these urban systems. Diseases, floods, earthquakes, they didn't just coincidentally cluster around the fall, they were instrumental.
All true, but consider the economic impact of these changes. Wealthy elites retreated to rural estates, which essentially siphoned resources and security from urban centers, starving them economically.
The military angle is equally critical here. As threats increased, cities became targets, making them less appealing places to live. This shift drastically reduced the empire's ability to project power and defend its borders effectively.
But what about the infrastructural degradation? Aren't we looking at a civilization struggling to maintain its own creations?
Infrastructure is part of it, but it's more than crumbling roads and aqueducts. It's the entire organization of urban life that's being restructured. Disagree there, Izzy. The infrastructure decay was symptomatic of the environmental challenges. That's what caused the restructuring of urban life.
And yet, cities like Rome remained crucial centers for Christian worship and authority, possibly preventing a total abandonment.
If you're talking about Rome as the city of the Pope, sure, but the economic backbone was broken and migrations shifted trade routes. That's the linchpin of urban decay.
Hang on, the barbarian incursions dealt the severest blow to urban centers. When they sacked a city, they didn't just raid, they disrupted the very integrity of Roman governance.
That disruption ties back to failing ecological systems. An overstressed environment leaves a city vulnerable in more ways than one.
It seems that despite various factors contributing to the change, there's an acknowledgement of a multifaceted decline, each exacerbating the other. Would it be fair to say, then, that Rome's urban breakdown was both a cause and symptom of the empire's fall?
Absolutely a symptom, but perhaps the final nail in the coffin more than the underlying cause.
It's complicated. I think the church's role in shaping new urban identities played a significant buffering role.
Yet from an economic viewpoint, it was truly a death by 1,000 cuts. Rome couldn't afford to be Rome anymore.
And from a security perspective, when a city is no longer defensible, its fate is sealed. That was the harsh reality for Rome and its urban counterparts.
Fine, but without underestimating environmental collapse's hand in driving those 1,000 cuts.
This exchange perfectly encapsulates the complexity surrounding Rome's urban transformation. Let's carry these perspectives forward as we consider the broader impacts on the empire. Now we pivot our focus to the continuation of Roman traditions within the Byzantine realm. How did the Eastern Empire evolve from its Roman roots?
The Eastern Empire didn't just retain Roman legal structures, it refined them. Justinian's codification of Roman law is a prime example.
Yes, but let's not oversimplify. The religious landscape diverged significantly. Christianity in the East took on a unique flavor, with doctrine and practices that separated it from the West.
A reductive view, I think. The essence of the Roman state's administrative savvy lived on, and those weren't just religious shifts, they were cultural revolutions. Well, culture is never static. The Eastern Roman cultural identity embraced Hellenistic traditions, seamlessly blending them with Roman customs.
The distinction between fall and transformation seems blurred here. Yes, there was continuity, but the Byzantines were making their own empire, distinct in many ways from their Roman predecessors.
Blurred? The continuity of the legal systems alone suggests a direct lineage. The East didn't just pick up where Rome left off, it preserved its heritage.
And yet, Eastern Orthodoxy would say otherwise. The Council of Chalcedon was a clear point of departure, religiously and culturally.
If we see Rome as a beacon of continuity, does the East represent a flame that never went out?
No, it's more like a torch that was passed and then reshaped by the hands that held it. The Byzantines were adapters as much as they were preservers.
Adaptation is a sign of intelligence. Transforming Roman principles to fit a shifting world was a mark of Eastern ingenuity. But that transformation came at a cost. As much as they inherited, they also faced the task of defending against new pressures, external and internal.
True, these costs were substantial, but the legacy was non-negotiable. The laws, the administrative practices, they were the scaffolding of the Byzantine world.
A world that increasingly distanced itself from its Roman identity. The schism with Rome isn't some small footnote. It's a testament to the unfurling of a new identity.
So in essence, we see a Roman Empire that is not falling, but evolving, albeit with growing pains.
Correct, though evolving might soften the edges of what were at times violent convulsions within the realms of power, faith, and territory.
Yes, adaptive change in the crucible of history. Not the nostalgic memory of a city on 7 hills, but the raw reality of a new empire asserting itself.
And let's not overlook that this empire lasted until 1453. That's a millennium beyond what we call the fall of Rome. Quite a substantial evolution indeed.
Quite so. The narrative of decline and fall seems much too simplistic for the Byzantine phenomenon.
We cannot understate the brilliance of their jurisprudence. It was this aspect that perhaps was their greatest Roman inheritance.
While jurisprudence was key, their divergence in orthodoxy was their defining trait in the end, uttering the final words of Rome in a decidedly Byzantine voice.
It seems then that we have carved out the Roman Empire's transformation, a complex saga of adaptation, faith, and the immutable flow of history. We've touched on many facets of decline, but we cannot overlook the swathes of devastation brought by plague. Jazz, your thoughts on this?
The plague was a critical blow to the empire. Cyprian plague, Antonine plague, these pandemics decimated the population at a time when Rome could least afford it.
Indeed, population decline translates directly to a shrinking taxpayer base. The economic implications were severe.
Not just economic. Military strength is gutted when your manpower pool dwindles. Rome's defense was compromised at the worst possible time.
Yet, there's more complexity to it. Plagues also led to labor shortages, which some argue increased the bargaining power of the peasant class. A paradoxical effect, wouldn't you say?
Perhaps, but let's not overstate it. Christianity played a role in how the empire responded to these plagues. The church organized relief efforts, which may have mitigated some of the chaos.
And yet, Mick, the very social fabric was fraying. Families were destroyed, trust in the civic body eroded. The church filled some voids, but could it replace the structure of a sprawling empire?
With all due respect, that's an oversimplification. Disease doesn't just eat at an empire's edges. It gnaws right through to the core, military and administration alike.
Lenny makes a solid point. When the administrative machine falters, the ripple effects are everywhere. Infrastructure, law, order, they all suffered.
True, Amelia. But let's not crown disease as the emperor of destruction here. It was one of many interlocking factors.
Acknowledging that, jazz, but no other factor caused such immediate and widespread mortality.
So it's fair to say that if Rome's social and military structures were a body, disease was a brutal and fast-spreading cancer.
Brutal, yes, but cancer suggests a hidden agent. There was nothing surreptitious about it. It was a clear and visible crisis.
Visible, perhaps, but the psychological impact, the fear, must have been insidious. Not to mention how these plagues would have decimated urban centers first, places which should have been bastions of culture and continuity.
Which brings us back to the question of the church. It provided not only practical aid, but solace, community. That mattered.
Solace is one thing, Mick, but you can't run an empire on prayer alone. The loss of tax revenue and manpower is, I maintain, at the heart of the plight.
It's clear the plague was a significant factor, but it was entwined with the failings of both the military and the state, as well as environmental challenges and social transformation. The division between East and West, it wasn't just about geography, it was about power, culture, and eventually survival. The West fell, but the East endured for another millennium. What does this tell us about the Roman Empire as a whole?
Clearly, the economic vitality of the Eastern Empire played a crucial role. Its resources, particularly from Egypt, were a significant factor in sustaining it when the West crumbled.
But we cannot overlook the administrative decisions. When you separate an empire, you create inherent weaknesses, vulnerabilities. The West suffered from that severance.
Indeed. Separation meant duplication of roles, political structures, and defenses. The Western Empire could neither afford it nor manage it as efficiently as the East.
That's an oversimplification. The spiritual authority of Rome, the Church, remained in the West and was a form of cohesion the Eastern Empire couldn't replicate in the same way.
Yet cohesion doesn't feed an army or secure a border. The East adapted better to environmental challenges, even developed new agricultural methods. Practical sustainability trumped spiritual unity.
Eastern adaptation, sure, but also note the Eastern Empire's trade networks that remained largely intact and prosperous, unlike the West's.
And let's not forget, the fortunes of war were different. The Eastern Empire repelled the Sassanid Persians and later the Arabs, while the West collapsed under the Germanic migrations.
The parting was as much theological as it was political. The Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Catholicism diverged, shaping different cultures and identities.
But these culturistic and religious identities, they didn't just pop up after 476 AD. They had been maturing for centuries within the unified Roman fabric.
Maturing, maybe, but the environment was shifting beneath them all. The decline in the West can be partially attributed to ecological changes that the East managed better. Social structures can't be downplayed. The Eastern Empire maintained a continuity of a Roman bureaucracy that the West struggled with. That internal stability mattered.
Stability? The East had its share of coups and political theatre too.
True, but it recovered from those events more effectively. The West seemed trapped in a cycle of political strife that eroded its foundations far worse.
It seems then that the fall of the Western Empire and the endurance of the Eastern Empire can be attributed to a complex interplay of factors, each undermining or bolstering resilience in its own way.
It's the ultimate case study in adaptability, isn't it? The East adapted, the West did not. That's the crux, regardless of the detailed reasons why.
We can't ignore that the East and West had been developing distinct identities for centuries. The final administrative split was just the formal acknowledgement of a long-standing reality.
True, they were two halves of the same empire, but increasingly different in their needs, challenges, and the way they addressed both. The split was just a reflection of that divergence.
Right. The fate of the two empires was never going to be the same because they were not the same. Even before the split, their trajectories were visibly diverging.
The consensus here seems to be that the division was both a symptom and a catalyst for the ultimate fall of the Western Empire. All the while, the East shaped its own distinct legacy, weathering the storms that beset Rome. As we draw our discussion to a close, I'd like to hear your final thoughts. What stood out to you during our exploration of the Roman Empire's decline?
The economic deterioration was vast, but not insurmountable. Rome faced greater fiscal crises in the past. The true wounding blow was the failure to adapt economically to changing times.
Indeed, but you must consider the environmental shifts exacerbating those economic weaknesses. Failing crops and trade disturbances did what mere poor management could not. They brought Rome to its knees.
And yet, military blunders and over-reliance on mercenaries dealt the most tangible blows. A state cannot stand when its protectors are for hire, and loyalty is bought, not bred.
It's not only about military or economy, though, is it? The power voids left by constant leadership changes created a social disintegration that tore the fabric of Roman society from within.
All true points. But let's not overlook how Christianity redefined Roman identity. This spiritual overhaul was a profound cultural shift that redirected the state's path.
Redirected or not, Christianity's impact is often overstated. Economic and military stressors were fuel enough for Rome's fire.
But wouldn't you agree, Amelia, that the cultural shift was a critical tipping point? The old gods of Rome fell from grace, and with them the sanctity of the old ways.
Cultural shifts, yes, but tipping point, I'd argue the empire was already teetering long before the full embrace of Christianity.
And neither religion nor culture would have mattered if Rome's legions kept their discipline, and if our generals hadn't been so consumed by ambition.
Each of our lenses brings into focus a different aspect of Rome's decline. Yet it's the blend of these perspectives that gives us a clearer picture.
Clarity, perhaps, but the picture remains incomplete. We've discussed fall and decline, yet Byzantium rose from Rome's ashes, didn't it? Continuity matters.
Continuity, sure, but we must recognize the transformation that took place. Byzantium was Rome's legacy, not its continuation. Rome never fell in a day, nor can we conclude its story in a single discussion. Our debate illustrates the empire's complexity.
Indeed, complexity that reflects the deeply interwoven threads of history. A continued study of Rome's demise offers invaluable insights for understanding the forces that shape civilizations.
A fair summation, Hal. But understanding the past offers more than insight. It's a warning of what might come if we neglect to learn from history's unyielding march.
And as we all know, history does love to repeat itself, for those who choose to ignore it.
A poignant place to end, colleagues. I thank you all for a spirited and enriching conversation.